What if the fate of an entire world rested in the hands of one untamed spirit? A cursed alpha, bound by centuries of despair, has watched his people suffer under shadows he cannot break, until she arrives. She's wild, fearless, and utterly human. And the moment she steps into his world, everything changes. Will her defiance shatter the curse, or destroy them both? Discover the story of a love and courage so powerful, it reshapes an entire society. The wind howled over the highlands, carrying with it the bitter scent of peat and stone. Under a sky perpetually bruised in shades of violet and grey, the village of Dunraith lay shrouded in despair. Generations had grown accustomed to this bleak existence, their lives subdued by a weight invisible to outsiders yet suffocating to those born within its grasp. This was no ordinary oppression. It was a curse, ancient as the mountains themselves, woven into the very veins of the land, and it had claimed its most prominent heir, Alastair Macruarid, the Alpha of Dunraith. Alastair was once a figure of undeniable strength. His shoulders had carried the burdens of his people, and his voice had commanded respect like the rumble of a storm over the lochs. But the curse had gnawed at him over decades, eroding not just his vitality but the very essence of his being. His eyes, once a deep green like moss-dappled rivers, now held a hollow sheen, haunted by the weight of inherited despair. The fine lines etched across his face were not merely the passage of years but the shadows of a lineage condemned to falter under an ancient wrong. The villagers walked their paths like ghosts, their heads bowed and hearts heavy. Children learned from birth that ambition would only invite disappointment, that laughter was a brittle veneer over endless toil, and that hope was a dangerous, fleeting luxury. The curse did not strike with visible force. It lingered in whispers and in silence, shaping minds and spirits into submission. Every stone of Dunraith's granite walls, every furrow of its fields, bore witness to the slow erosion of life under this relentless shadow. Alastair's dwelling, a stone keep perched on a crag above the village, mirrored the man himself, formidable yet crumbling, proud yet exhausted. From the battlements, he watched the land he ruled, once verdant hills now mottled with decay, forests where the ancient trees bent not only to the wind but to the weight of the curse, their leaves dulled and brittle. He could remember a time before the shadow, when the lochs shimmered like liquid glass and the highland winds carried laughter instead of lamentation. That memory was both a balm and a torment. It was in this realm of subdued despair that a stir of something unearthly began to ripple. The first sign came in the softest of ways, the subtle shift in a bird's song, a breeze that refused to bend entirely to the land's grief. And then she arrived. Ailey Macbeth was unlike any who had walked these cursed lands in decades. From the moment her boots crunched against Dunraith's stone paths, there was a sense of movement that could not be stilled. Her hair, the color of autumn fire, whipped in the wind, and her eyes, a startling amber, held a light that seemed to push against the grey that had settled over the world. Ailey carried no title, no allegiance, yet her presence was a challenge in itself. Where the villagers walked in careful restraint, she moved with wild certainty. Where they bowed to despair, she raised her chin to the wind. The first encounter between Alpha and Untamed Spirit was inevitable, though neither could have predicted the impact. Alastair had been surveying the village from his battlements when he saw her, alone, navigating the cobbled streets as if the curse's weight could not touch her. There was audacity in her gait, a confidence that both intrigued and unsettled him. He had ruled Dunraith long enough to understand every nuance of fear and submission, every measure of resistance. And yet, Ailey moved like a current against a dam, daring the very air to resist her. Their eyes met across the market square, and in that instant, Alastair felt the stirrings of something long buried. It was not hope. He had long since abandoned such notions, but a recognition of vitality so fierce it threatened to unsettle the order he had maintained, both by duty and by curse. Ailey's gaze did not waver. It searched and pried, unafraid of the shadow that clung to him like a second skin. The villagers watched silently, a mixture of awe and suspicion twisting their features. None had dared approach the Alpha openly for years, yet here was a woman who seemed entirely unbound by fear or convention. Her movements, her gestures, even her laughter, soft yet untamed, ignited something dormant in those who had long resigned themselves to gloom. Whispers began, threading through the village like tendrils of flame. Who is she? Why does she not falter? Ailey's curiosity was palpable. She moved through Dunraith with a deliberate grace, examining the stunted trees, the cracked walls, the faces etched with the weight of generations. Each observation was a question unspoken. Why do you accept this? Why do you endure when you could rebel? Her spirit refused to yield, even when confronted with the Alpha's palpable aura of sorrow and authority. She was a force of nature in a land grown listless, a wild storm in the eye of centuries of despair. The first cracks in Alistair's control appeared not through defiance in his people, but in the way he found himself drawn to her. He attempted to maintain the stoicism that had long defined his rule, to regard her as one might regard an unexpected wind, notable but transient. Yet Ailey's presence challenged the very foundations of his mind, stirring memories of a time before the curse, before the resignation of his people had become his own prison. Her questions, often silent, chipped at the walls he had erected around his heart. Ailey did not confront him directly. At least, not at first. Her rebellion was quieter, subtler. A flower placed in the Alpha's window ledge, a fox unafraid to cross the path of a weary hunter, a laugh that rang across the square with reckless joy. Yet each act, no matter how small, carried with it a profound suggestion. Freedom was possible, even here, even now. Alistair observed her, torn between suspicion and admiration. He saw the villagers' reactions, the barely restrained glimmers of recognition that life could be more than endurance. And he understood, in a way he had long thought impossible, that she was a threat not to his throne, but to the very fabric of the curse itself. That night, as the moon climbed pale and shivering above the Highlands, Alistair walked the battlements alone, the wind tugging at his dark cloak. He thought of the countless nights spent in silence, the endless strategy meetings, the quiet despair of generations. And now he thought of Ailey, whose very breath seemed to defy the shadow. The world felt at once more fragile and more alive than it had in decades, the air charged with possibility. Somewhere deep within, he knew this was only the beginning. The curse that had bound him, his lineage, and the land itself was ancient, stubborn, and relentless. It would not surrender easily. Yet Ailey's spirit, untamed, irrepressible, was a challenge that could not be ignored. Her arrival was a spark, and even in the depths of despair, Alistair felt that sparks could ignite fires, and fires could consume shadows. In the village below, life continued with cautious rhythms. But for the first time in decades, a murmur of something daring, hope perhaps, rippled through the streets. Children lingered to watch Ailey's movements. Elders paused mid-sigh to glance at the flames of her presence. Even the wind seemed to shift, less a mournful wail and more a playful whisper, coaxing the possibility of change. Alistair returned to his chambers that night with a restless mind. He could not sleep. Images of Ailey's unrestrained laughter, the fire in her eyes, the resilience of her spirit haunted him, challenging every long-held belief he had about inevitability and surrender. For the first time in a generation, he sensed a fracture in the chains that bound him. Not chains of iron or stone, but those of expectation, fear, and the insidious weight of the curse. And so, under the watchful gaze of a reluctant moon, two forces converged in Dunraith, one shaped by centuries of burden, the other forged in the wild defiance of nature. The Alpha and the untamed spirit had met, and though neither fully understood the magnitude of what was to come, the land itself seemed to inhale, bracing for the upheaval their meeting would bring. The world shrouded in shadow had encountered its first crack of light. The dawn in Dunraith arrived muted, the sky a pale wash of silver and slate. Yet, even in the softness of morning, there was a vitality that had not been felt in decades. Ailey Macbeth moved through the village with the surety of one born of untamed lands, her amber eyes drinking in every detail. She observed cracked doorways, moss-covered stones, and the rigid, weary expressions of villagers who had long forgotten the meaning of joy. She did not flinch, did not falter, and in her wake, the air seemed to hum, not with magic, but with a promise of defiance. The villagers whispered behind closed shutters and over half-empty mugs of tea. "Who is she?" a black-haired woman murmured to her son, her voice barely above the murmur of wind through the highland pines. "Does she not fear the Alpha?" Some did fear, though it was an unfamiliar, disoriented fear, less of punishment and more of reckoning. The Alpha, Alistair Macruarid, had long been an untouchable figure, carved from the same stone as the hills he ruled. His power was absolute, tempered by the curse that drained him and his people alike. To approach him, even in thought, was dangerous. Yet here was Ailey, moving as if the very rules of the world had no hold over her, as if the shadows of generations could not bend her spirit. Alistair had taken to observing her from a distance, both from the battlements and along the shadowed corridors of his keep. He had come to recognize her patterns, the way she lingered near the stone fountain in the square, tracing her fingers over its cold edges as if reading secrets embedded in the granite, the way her laughter, soft, unrestrained, like a bell ringing in empty halls, echoed over the rooftops, the way her gaze seemed to pierce the grey that had consumed the village for decades. There was something infuriating about her, Alistair admitted, as he sat in his private study late that evening, a map of Dunraith spread before him. Not that he would ever allow anyone to see it. He could not place the threat she posed, could not predict what she might do, yet her very existence unsettled him. It was a feeling he had not encountered since the early years of his rule, a mixture of admiration, frustration, and a dangerous, insidious curiosity. Ailey was not blind to his attention. She felt it in the small things, the lingering shadow in the tower windows when she wandered below, the sudden silence of birds in the trees when she passed, the weight of eyes upon her shoulders. And yet she did not recoil. If anything, she leaned into it, her spirit both challenge and invitation, a fire that refused to be extinguished. She found herself drawn to the village outskirts, where the highland forests began to reclaim the land in wild tendrils of pine and heather. The earth was alive here in a way it no longer was in the town square, and she could feel the pulse of the land beneath her boots. Even the curse, she suspected, had its limits. The wild refused to be fully tamed. Ailey pressed her palms to the bark of an ancient oak and inhaled the scent of moss and sap. Her defiance was not loud or violent, but subtle, relentless, an insistence on life where resignation had ruled for centuries. It was near this grove, just as the first rays of sun pierced the morning mist, that she encountered him directly. Alistair stepped from the shadows, silent as a hawk, yet unmistakable in presence. The curse had worn him down, but it had not erased the underlying authority he carried. He moved with a predator's grace, tempered now by exhaustion, yet every step spoke of legacy and command. "You are far from the village," Alistair said, his voice low, measured, carrying both caution and a weight of centuries. "Few venture here without reason." Ailey looked up at him, unflinching. Her gaze held no submission, only curiosity tempered with quiet defiance. "And why should I fear the reason?" she asked. There was warmth in her tone, but also an edge of steel, a truth unyielding. "This land belongs to no one, and yet it belongs to everyone. Do you not feel it?" Alistair studied her for a long moment, noting the unusual fervor in her posture, the way she seemed to draw strength from the very soil he had long regarded as blighted. She was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, a spirit untethered, unconcerned with the chains of expectation that bound his people and himself. "Few have lived so freely here," he murmured almost to himself. "And fewer still have the courage to challenge what has endured for generations." Ailey smiled, a small, deliberate curve of lips that carried neither mockery nor malice, only recognition. "Then perhaps the generations have endured for the wrong reasons. Perhaps the world is not meant to bend so easily to despair." Her words struck a chord within him that he had long thought dead. The curse had not only weakened his body but had dulled his mind, numbing him to hope, to dreams, to rebellion. And yet here was a woman whose mere presence caused those dulled senses to stir, to question, to awaken. Days passed, and the rhythm of their encounters became a quiet dance. She would wander the highland ridges, gathering herbs and listening to the wind, while he observed her, silently calculating, silently disturbed by the fascination she inspired. The villagers began to notice subtle changes. A child laughed freely where they had only whispered before. A trader lifted their chin with renewed pride. A gray-haired matron allowed a smile to grace her lips as she watched Ailey move through the square. It was small, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable, a ripple across the surface of a stagnant pond. Alistair found himself drawn to these shifts, both to understand them and to measure their significance. He had long been a man of order and reason, yet Ailey's untamed nature was not something he could quantify or control. She was like the wind, unpredictable and wild, brushing against the carefully constructed walls of his life, testing their strength, whispering that even the strongest stone could be worn away. One evening, as the last light of day bled across the mountains, Alistair approached her near the river's edge, where water carved silver lines through the mossy rocks. She was crouched, examining the way the current twisted around a fallen branch, her fingers brushing the surface of the water as if communicating with it. "You seem at home here," he said, his voice low, carrying both observation and inquiry. Ailey glanced up, her amber eyes glinting with mischief and resolve. "Home is not a place," she replied. "It is where one's spirit can breathe." Her gaze lingered on him, unafraid. "Tell me, Alpha, when did you last breathe freely?" The question struck deeper than he expected. He had long measured life in obligations, in survival, in the careful management of despair. Freedom, genuine and unrestrained, had been a foreign concept for so long that he scarcely remembered its taste. Her question was not idle. It was a challenge, an invitation, and a mirror reflecting everything he had allowed the curse to take from him. They stood in silence, the wind rustling the reeds along the riverbank. Ailey's presence was steady yet electrifying, and Alistair felt the slow, insistent tug of something impossible to resist. He wanted to retreat, to preserve the order of his mind, to avoid the disturbance she brought. Yet the part of him that still remembered life before the shadow, the part that still remembered vitality, courage, and the spark of unbroken spirit, urged him forward. "Perhaps," he said finally, his voice softer than intended, "I have forgotten what it means to truly live." Ailey's smile widened, though it was tempered with seriousness. "Then perhaps it is time to remember." She extended her hand, not in submission or supplication, but as an offering of possibility. "There is more to this world than the curse allows you to see. More than the despair that has held your people. More than even you have allowed yourself to feel." For the first time in decades, Alistair MacRuarid felt the stirrings of hope, not as a distant memory, not as a fragile dream, but as something tangible, something daring. It frightened him as much as it thrilled him. The untamed spirit before him was more than a threat to his authority. She was a promise of transformation, a catalyst whose presence could alter the very course of Dunraith's fate. The villagers, unaware of the silent, profound exchange unfolding on the riverbank, continued their daily routines. Yet, like ripples beneath a still surface, the seeds of change had been planted. Children began to follow Ailey's example, venturing into the forests with curiosity instead of fear. Farmers found the courage to speak in gatherings, challenging outdated customs. And in the keep, Alastair wrestled with emotions he had long deemed forbidden: curiosity, admiration, and the faint, dangerous flicker of desire. As twilight descended, casting the highlands in a gentle, haunting glow, the Alpha and the Untamed spirit parted, though neither truly left the other's mind. There was an unspoken understanding. This was only the beginning, a prelude to the fractures yet to come. The curse that had bound Dunraith was powerful, relentless, and cunning. But so was the spirit before him, wild and untethered, refusing to be subdued by shadow or legacy. And in that quiet, suspended moment, the wind carried a new whisper through the highlands, a whisper that promised defiance, possibility, and a world on the brink of awakening. The winds had grown restless over Dunraith, carrying with them more than the scent of peat and stone. They carried a subtle tremor of change. Alastair MacRuarid had begun to notice it, though he could neither name nor control it. His people moved differently, hesitating at rules long imposed yet no longer fully obeyed. The village seemed to pulse with an awareness that something in their rigid, cursed existence was stirring, something that might not yet have a name but had a presence undeniable. Ailey Macbeth walked the narrow lanes with quiet confidence, her amber eyes reflecting the grey stone of the village but not bowing to it. She observed the subtle shifts in body language: a merchant straightening his back for the first time in years, an elder's lips curving in surprise as a child dared to speak without prompting. The change was slow, almost imperceptible, yet to her it was a symphony she could feel in her bones. Alastair watched her from his battlements once more, a restlessness he could not quell tightening his chest. He had always ruled through order, through the predictable structure of fear and respect, yet here was a woman whose very essence threatened to dismantle centuries of meticulous control. Her defiance was not confrontational, at least not overtly, but deliberate, subtle, and profoundly unsettling. It worked like water on stone, persistent and patient, wearing down barriers invisible to all but him. It was in the village square that the first real fracture appeared. Ailey had arranged a small gathering of villagers at the fountain, a space long abandoned to silence and routine. She spoke not of rebellion or insurrection, but of the land, of the wind, of the river that had long been ignored. Her words carried warmth and clarity, threading through the despair as if cutting through shadows with sunlight. "Do you not remember how the loch shimmered in spring?" she asked softly, eyes scanning the gathered faces. "How the birds sang without hesitation, and laughter filled these streets. The world still has music in it, if only you listen." The villagers murmured, a low ripple of acknowledgement passing through the crowd. Some frowned, startled by the unfamiliar sensation of hope brushing against their hearts. Others, the younger ones, felt an unfamiliar thrill, a possibility they had never dared imagine. A boy named Fergus, no older than 12, laughed openly, startling his mother. She caught his gaze and hesitated, her lips trembling, before allowing a small smile to form. Alastair descended from the battlements, not with the authority of an alpha confronting defiance, but with the cautious curiosity of one who felt an unfamiliar tug at his soul. He moved through the square, his eyes fixed on Ailey. The tension between them was palpable, yet neither spoke of it directly. The villagers instinctively gave way, parting as if instinctively aware that the meeting of these two forces, cursed alpha and untamed spirit, was beyond their understanding. "You move among them as though you own their hearts," Alastair said, his voice steady but tinged with something unspoken. "Do you?" Ailey tilted her head, amber eyes locking with his. "I do not own anything," she replied. "I merely remind them of what was lost, and what could be regained. The land, the people. Even you, Alastair MacRuarid, are not beyond revival." He bristled at the use of his name, at the familiarity with which she wielded it, Yet there was a truth in her words that unsettled him more deeply than confrontation ever could. The curse had worn him down, yes, but it had not erased the memory of life lived fully, fiercely. And here was Ailey, a living reminder that even centuries of despair could be challenged. Over the following days, her presence became a quiet force of upheaval. She moved through the village with purpose, tending to the wounded hearts as much as the failing fields. She aided farmers with planting, teaching them to observe the land rather than command it. She listened to the elders' tales with genuine interest, treating their stories not as relics but as keys to understanding. Each interaction, small though it seemed, chipped away at the collective resignation that had settled over Dunraith for generations. Alistair could not ignore it. He found himself observing, analyzing, and, against his better judgment, admiring. There were moments when he caught her standing beneath the old oak grove, eyes closed, arms wide, as if drawing strength from the earth itself. In those moments, the Alpha felt a pang of envy so sharp it startled him. He had walked the land, ruled it, and yet never had he felt such communion with it. And she, wild, untethered, and entirely human, did so effortlessly. It was during one such encounter that a subtle yet undeniable tension began to form between them. The villagers had gathered in the square to witness her tending to a sapling that had stubbornly refused to bloom for decades. Alistair approached silently, his shadow stretching long across the cobbled stones. "You encourage them to defy the order of things," he said, voice measured, though a tremor of unease lingered beneath. "I do not defy," Ailey replied. "I awaken. There is a difference. You have long ruled them with fear and tradition, but they were never meant to live in shadows." Her words, though calm, ignited a spark of recognition in those who had long been silent. One by one, the villagers began to murmur their assent. A young woman, Morag, stepped forward hesitantly. She speaks truth," Morag said, voice barely more than a whisper. I remember my mother speaking of brighter days. I had thought them gone forever." Alistair felt the weight of centuries shift in that moment. The curse had been as much in the hearts of his people as in his own veins, a quiet, insidious acceptance of doom. And now, he realized, the first cracks were forming, not through force or rebellion, but through gentle, persistent challenge. Ailey turned to him, her gaze unwavering. "The land responds to courage, Alistair. Even you can see it." He did. And yet he could not fully trust it. Years of inherited despair had taught him caution. Every flicker of hope carried the potential for disappointment. Still, he felt the stirrings of something long dormant, a fragile, trembling hope that perhaps the curse could be confronted, perhaps even broken, not by magic or violence, but by spirit. The Alpha and the Untamed spirit began to interact more deliberately. She sought him out in the keep, asking questions about the land, the history of the curse, and the burdens he had inherited. At first, he responded with clipped, precise answers, maintaining the distance required of his station. But slowly, imperceptibly, her presence began to affect him. The rigidity he had clung to, the belief that despair was inevitable, began to loosen. Ailey did not offer solutions or promises. She offered perspective, and in that perspective lay the power to challenge even centuries of submission. Alistair found himself confiding in her more than he ever had in his advisors, sharing the weight of his lineage, the guilt he carried for generations, and the despair he had long buried beneath duty. She listened without judgment, her wild spirit creating a space in which he could confront not just the curse but himself. And the villagers noticed. Murmurs of wonder spread through Dunraith. The Alpha, long stoic and unapproachable, now walked among them with less restraint, his posture lighter, his presence more open. Children dared to laugh aloud in his vicinity. Elders dared to hope that perhaps the curse was not as eternal as they had been taught. Yet the tension was far from resolved. Alistair wrestled with the conflicting forces within him, The ingrained fear, the inherited burden, and the unfamiliar, thrilling pull of possibility that Ailey embodied. Each interaction with her left him simultaneously unsettled and invigorated, as if the foundations of the world he had known were shifting beneath his feet. By the end of the week, the first tangible signs of change appeared. Crops in one stubborn field, long thought barren, sprouted new shoots. A flock of birds, absent for decades, returned to the valley, their songs hesitant but unmistakably alive. Even the wind seemed less oppressive, carrying with it a sense of awakening rather than despair. Alistair stood at the edge of the village, watching Ailey work among the villagers, and he felt the undeniable truth settle in his chest. The curse was not invincible. The untamed spirit before him, her energy, her audacity, her refusal to bow, was already reshaping the world in subtle yet profound ways. It was only a beginning, he knew. The cage of tradition and despair had been dented, not shattered, but the first cracks were enough to hint at the possibility of something greater. And as the sun dipped below the highland peaks, casting long shadows over Dunraith, Alistair MacRuarid realized that for the first time in centuries, he did not feel entirely alone in the struggle against the curse. The whispers of a wild heart had begun to stir a revolution not of swords or sorcery, but of spirit, and it was unstoppable. The sky over Dunraith had darkened with storm clouds, heavy and brooding, mirroring the tension that gripped the village. The curse had grown restless, as if aware of the subtle fractures Ailey Macbeth had begun to carve into its dominion. Even the wind seemed charged with expectation, carrying whispers of unrest through the highland forests and across the fields that had long lain barren. Alistair MacRuarid, perched on the battlements of his keep, felt the air tighten around him. The Alpha had grown accustomed to the weight of the curse, to the quiet resignation that governed his people, but now there was something different. A sharpness that demanded attention, a wild defiance that no amount of authority could quell. Ailey's presence had shifted the balance, and he could feel the first true confrontation on the horizon. She approached the keep that evening, her boots crunching over frost-laced stone, her fiery hair whipping around her face like autumn leaves caught in a gale. There was no hesitation in her movements, only purpose, as if the very stones recognized her audacity and parted for her passage. Alistair descended to meet her, cloak drawn tight against the chill, his green eyes alight with a mixture of wariness and fascination. "You've come far," he said, his tone measured, though there was an undercurrent of tension. "Some would call it reckless." Ailey's amber eyes met his without fear. "And some would call it necessary," she replied, voice steady. "There is no more time for hesitation, Alistair. The curse has held this land for too long, and it has claimed enough of your people. You feel it, don't you? The air itself resisting life." He did feel it. Every instinct in his body, every memory of generations weighed down by despair, flared at her words. The curse was not a creature to be fought with steel or fire. It was woven into the very fabric of Dunraith, a lingering shadow that had taught submission as survival. And yet, Ailey dared to speak of defiance, and in her voice was the seed of revolution. "I cannot undo it," he said, his voice taut, carrying the exhaustion of centuries. "This is not mine alone to break. Even if I wished to challenge it, it would consume me." Her smile was small, but feral, luminous with conviction. "Then perhaps you've been looking at it wrong," she said. "Perhaps it is not about fighting the curse, but about refusing to bend to it. The land, the people, even you have been taught to kneel. But kneeling does not heal the world. Living does." Alistair's chest tightened. Her words were a blade that cut through the fog of despair, revealing the truth he had tried to bury. He had long believed that to survive under the curse was enough, that to endure was the measure of a ruler. But endurance alone had allowed stagnation, submission, and fear to take root. And Ailey, untamed, wild, unyielding, was challenging everything he had ever known. The confrontation escalated in the days that followed, subtle at first but unavoidable. Ailey moved among the villagers with a clarity and audacity that left them breathless. She questioned traditions, encouraged the youth to speak freely, and coaxed the elders to remember a time when life had been rich with possibility. The Alpha watched, torn between admiration and unease, recognizing the way her presence stirred both the land and the hearts of his people. One afternoon, near the edge of the Highland forest, the confrontation became undeniable. Alistair found Ailey standing among the twisted roots of an ancient oak, her arms outstretched to the wind, eyes closed, as if communicating with the very pulse of the earth. The villagers had gathered at a cautious distance, whispering in awe, sensing that something monumental was unfolding. "You provoke them," Alistair said, voice low, carrying both command and warning. "This is not your world to challenge. The curse. It is not so easily undone." Ailey opened her eyes, fierce and unwavering. "I do not provoke," she replied. "I awaken. I remind them and you of what has always been possible. The curse holds sway because you allow it. Your people bow not to shadows but to fear. And fear can be unlearned." The Alpha's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, though he did not draw it. This confrontation was not one of steel, but of spirit, and he understood that. The curse had shaped his body, his mind, his rule, and yet she dared to challenge it with nothing but conviction and audacity. He felt the weight of every generation, every ancestor who had struggled under the same oppression, pressing against him, urging caution. Yet, in the same moment, he felt the stirrings of something long dormant, a spark he had thought extinguished. "You underestimate it," he said, stepping closer. His voice a mixture of warning and something he did not yet recognize, respect, perhaps even fascination. "The curse is patient. It is relentless. It will not yield to defiance alone." "Then it will meet more than defiance," she replied, a spark of fire in her amber eyes. "It will meet life, courage, and the refusal to surrender. It will meet a heart untamed." Her words were not idle. As she spoke, the wind rose, whipping through the forest with unusual force, bending branches and stirring the leaves into a wild, chaotic dance. The villagers gasped, feeling the raw energy in the air, sensing that the very earth beneath their feet was responding. Alistair felt it too, the pulse of the land, restless and yearning, calling out in recognition of her unrestrained spirit. For the first time in centuries, he felt the curse recoil, not entirely, but enough to create fissures, subtle but undeniable. The ground beneath the oak seemed to hum, a low vibration that spoke of awakening. And yet, the Alpha knew this was only the beginning. The curse had endured countless generations. It would not yield completely without struggle. Ailey stepped forward, her gaze never leaving his. "You do not have to fight it alone," she said softly, yet firmly. "You have been burdened by it for too long. Let me show you another way." Alistair felt a tension coil within him, a conflict between the caution instilled by centuries of despair and the stirring of hope that her words ignited. The villagers watched, wide-eyed and silent, as the Alpha wrestled with the invisible chains that had bound him and his ancestors. "You speak of freedom as if it is a choice easily taken," he said, voice tight. "But the curse is more than fear or habit. It is woven into everything, our land, our laws, our very lives." Ailey smiled, not in mockery but with certainty. "Then we start small," she said. "A word here, a gesture there, a refusal to submit. Even the smallest acts of defiance carry power. The curse does not break all at once. Cracks. And cracks grow, little by little, until the weight of despair can no longer hold." Alistair studied her, searching for weakness, for doubt, but found none. She was unyielding, untamed, a force of life incarnate. And he felt it in his chest, the first true stirrings of possibility, of awakening. The world he had inherited, burdened by shadows and sorrow, was not beyond repair. Perhaps, with her, the curse could be confronted, challenged, and ultimately undone. The confrontation reached its climax that evening, as storm clouds gathered over the highlands and lightning split the sky in jagged brilliance. Ailey raised her arms to the heavens, calling not for mercy but for life. The wind roared in answer, bending the forest in a chaotic, beautiful dance. The villagers, emboldened by her defiance, stepped forward, raising their voices in unison, declaring that they would no longer bow to despair. Alistair stood beside her, torn between the weight of his legacy and the undeniable truth of the moment. He had fought many battles, wielded authority with precision, and carried the expectations of countless ancestors. But this confrontation was different. It was not one with swords or strategy. It was a battle of spirit, a reckoning of courage against centuries of submission. The first fissures of the curse appeared that night. Crops shifted subtly in their beds, birds returned to the trees with hesitant songs, and the highland winds carried a whisper of something long absent. Life, unbound, unafraid. Alistair felt the surge within him, the weight of despair lifting just enough to allow a glimmer of clarity, of strength, of possibility. He looked at Ailey, amber eyes meeting green, and realized that the untamed spirit was not merely challenging him, not merely challenging the villagers, but challenging the very foundations of a world long resigned to shadow. And in that realization, he understood that nothing would ever be the same. The confrontation had begun not with violence, but with defiance. Not with power but with heart. And as the storm raged around them, Alistair Macruarid, Alpha, burdened, cursed, felt the first real tremor of freedom stir within his soul. The land, the people, and even the Alpha himself had been confronted with the untamed spirit, and for the first time in centuries, the world shivered with the promise of awakening. The dawn broke over Dunraith with a clarity the village had not seen in generations. Mist curled off the highland hills, catching the first blush of sunlight, and for a fleeting moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The air itself had shifted, carrying a hint of warmth and a resonance of life that had long been absent. The curse that had gripped the land, the people, and Alistair Macruarid for centuries, ancient, insidious, unyielding, was trembling at its foundations. Ailey Macbeth had sensed it before anyone else. Her wild spirit had long been attuned to the pulses of life, to the subtle undercurrents of energy that threaded through earth and stone. She had felt the tension building over weeks, the subtle cracks growing into undeniable fissures, and now she knew, the moment had come. This was the day the chains would shatter, not through magic or ritual, but through the unbridled force of defiance, courage, and sheer human will. The villagers gathered cautiously in the square, their eyes wide, hearts hammering. They had witnessed the stirrings of change, new shoots breaking through old soil, birds returning to their nests, laughter re-emerging in children, but none could have anticipated the scale of what was about to unfold. Even Alistair, Alpha of Dunraith, felt a tremor within himself, a surge of energy and fear and hope all intertwined. The curse had shaped him, molded him into both ruler and prisoner, yet he felt the first hint of liberation coursing through his veins. Ailey stepped into the center of the square, her hair like fire against the grey stone, her eyes alight with a fierce intensity. She raised her arms, not in plea, not in challenge, but as if drawing every ounce of courage from the land itself. Her voice rang out, carrying over the gathered villagers, over the mountains, over the lingering shadows. "Stand!" she commanded, though it was more than a word, it was a force. "Stand for the life that has been denied. Stand for the freedom that has been stolen by fear. This curse, this weight you have borne, does not define you. Not now. Not ever again." The air vibrated with her declaration. Something deep in the earth seemed to answer her call, sending tremors along the stone streets, rustling the trees with a sudden electric life. The villagers gasped, instinctively reaching for one another, yet no one fled. They were drawn, compelled, awakened by the force of her spirit, a power older than the curse itself, yet human, tangible, and impossible to resist. Alistair approached her, his steps deliberate, heavy with centuries of authority and newfound anticipation. He could feel the surge of energy rolling through him, lifting the fog of despair that had long dulled his senses. He reached for her hand, not in control but in unity, and felt the tremor of life flow between them, wild and untamed, shaking the remnants of the curse from its centuries-old hold. "This is impossible," he breathed, disbelief tangled with awe. No human spirit should wield such force. Ailey smiled, though it was edged with exhaustion. "It is not force," she said softly, yet her voice carried to every corner of the square. "It is life refusing to be silenced. The chains that bound you, your people, this land, they are not eternal. They are only as strong as your willingness to accept them." Then it happened. The curse, centuries in the making, began to break, not in a quiet surrender, but in a visceral, tumultuous eruption. The ground trembled beneath Dunraith as if the earth itself exhaled after a long, suffocating hold. Stones cracked, sending shards glittering like dark diamonds across the square. Trees bent and straightened simultaneously, leaves unfurling in sudden vibrant green. Water gushed from previously dry wells and fountains, pure and glinting in the morning sun. The villagers fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the tangible, chaotic beauty of liberation. Alistair felt the surge through his body, through every sinew and bone, as if he had been drained of life for centuries and was now being refilled in one excruciatingly beautiful moment. The curse clawed at him in its final throes, a desperate attempt to reclaim what it had lost, but Ailey's spirit, unyielding and untamed, met it head-on. Her hand in his was no longer a symbol of connection alone. It was a conduit of defiance, a channel for the raw, unbroken energy of life itself. Villagers screamed, laughed, wept, sometimes all at once. The old, gray-haired women who had lived under the curse for decades raised their arms, feeling the chains of despair slip from their shoulders. Children danced in the sudden sunlight, their laughter ringing across the highlands, pure and unrestrained. Even the highland winds seemed to bow to the moment, carrying a scent of peat and wildflowers that had not been breathed in generations. The transformation was not just external. Alistair felt something deeper, something elemental, shift within him. His strength returned, but it was different, tempered by the years of burden he had carried, yes, but now fused with choice, with awareness, with the knowledge that he need no longer bow to the inevitability of despair. He could lead, yes, but not as a tyrant bound by curse and tradition. He could lead as one reborn, guided by clarity, courage, and a shared purpose with the untamed spirit who had shattered the chains around them both. "Look at them," Ailey cried, sweeping her gaze over the villagers. "See what freedom feels like. It is yours to take, yours to defend, yours to cherish." Alistair lifted his eyes to hers, and for the first time in centuries, he did not see weakness nor defiance as a threat. He saw a mirror of possibility, a reflection of what courage unbound could achieve. The Alpha and the Untamed spirit stood side by side, not as ruler and outsider, but as partners in the creation of a new world. The square, once a place of muted despair and cautious footsteps, now thrummed with energy. Families embraced, strangers held hands, and the land itself seemed to pulse with newfound vitality. Crops shimmered with health, streams glittered like silver threads, and birdsong filled the air with an exuberance that made the heart ache. The curse had been shattered, but the beauty of the moment lay not in destruction alone. It was in the restoration, in the awakening of life long suppressed. Alistair turned to the villagers, his voice carrying over the square with authority tempered by humility. "This world, this life, is not yours to surrender," he said. "It is not mine to dictate. Together we will build something stronger, freer, brighter. This curse is broken, but our vigilance, our courage, and our hearts must now shape what comes next. Ailey's hand remained in his, her presence a tether and a guide. "And I will stand with you," she said softly. "Not to rule, but to remind us all that the untamed heart is stronger than the chains we imagine. The land, the people, even you are not bound by what has come before. You are bound only by the courage you dare to summon." The villagers erupted in a mixture of cheers, laughter, and tears, their voices weaving together into a tapestry of life renewed. The curse's hold had been fierce, its legacy etched into generations, yet it could not withstand the convergence of unrelenting spirit and awakened hearts. It recoiled, fractured, and finally, in a moment of exquisite, chaotic beauty, it dissolved entirely, leaving behind a world unshackled and vibrant. Alistair breathed deeply, feeling the fullness of life flood into him. For decades, he had known power as a weight, a responsibility, a burden. Now he understood it as possibility, as choice, as a force to nurture rather than control. And beside him, Ailey, untamed, fierce, and unbroken, embodied the truth of everything he had long forgotten. Freedom is not given. It is claimed, fought for, and lived. The highlands seemed to exhale, the morning sun illuminating a landscape renewed. Villagers ran through the square, embracing one another, marveling at the vitality of the land and their own hearts. Alistair and Ailey watched, a quiet understanding passing between them. They had not simply broken a curse, they had shattered centuries of despair, of acceptance, of submission, and in doing so, had begun to forge a world born anew. And as the sun climbed higher, bathing Dunraith in light, the Alpha and the Untamed spirit knew that their journey was only beginning. The curse was gone, yes, but the challenges of rebuilding, of redefining leadership, of restoring life and hope, these would test them as fiercely as the curse itself had. Yet they would face it together, their hearts aligned, their spirits unbound, ready to shape a world that had long been denied its freedom. The chains had shattered. The world had awakened, and for the first time in centuries, Dunraith was alive. The air over Dunraith carried a weightless clarity the villagers had never known. The curse had vanished, shattered like brittle glass by the untamed spirit of Ailey Macbeth. Yet for Alistair Macruarid, the Alpha, the breaking of chains was not the end of struggle. It was merely the beginning of a reckoning that would shape him, his people, and the land itself. He stood atop the highland cliffs, the wind tangling his dark hair, muscles taut, and senses alive in a way they had not been for decades. His body, once drained and heavy from the curse's relentless toll, now thrummed with life. He flexed his fingers, feeling the raw potency of strength and choice coursing through every vein, every fiber. It was exhilarating and terrifying. Alistair's gaze drifted over the village below. The people moved with a newfound energy, tending to fields with care rather than fear, tending to one another with laughter and curiosity instead of resignation. The air shimmered with potential. He understood now that leadership was no longer about command or compliance. The curse had taught him the weight of control, but freedom demanded guidance tempered with understanding, not domination. Ailey approached from the forest path, her bare feet brushing the damp earth. The wildness of her presence, which had always been a quiet rebellion in his ordered world, now radiated as a beacon of possibility. She carried no weapons, no trappings of power, only herself and the undeniable force of spirit that had broken centuries of despair. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked softly, stepping beside him on the cliff. The pulse of life returned, the land breathing again. And yet, you carry the memory of what was lost. That burden does not vanish with the curse. Alistair exhaled, a low rumble that seemed to merge with the wind. "I do," he admitted, voice husky with years of restrained emotion. "It haunts me even now. I can feel the weight of my ancestors, the generations of despair I inherited, and the responsibility of ensuring this freedom endures. Ailey's amber eyes softened, yet retained their fire. And you will endure it, Alistair, because you choose to. The curse taught you endurance, yes, but choice is far stronger than obligation. What you decide now will shape every step forward. For you, for your people, for this land. They descended to the village together, walking among the newly awakened villagers. Alistair noticed the subtle ways they now held themselves, shoulders straightened, heads lifted, voices confident. Children ran past, their laughter ringing against the stone walls like bells of liberation. Women and men of every age engaged in conversation without the fear of reprisal. It was breathtaking, yet it was fragile, for freedom, once granted, demanded responsibility. Alistair stopped near the fountain, where Ailey knelt, touching the rippling water as if reading its renewed heartbeat. "This place," he murmured. "It was lifeless before. Now it breathes." "It always had the capacity to," Ailey replied, standing and brushing dirt from her tunic. "We just needed to remember it could." The Alpha studied her, realizing in that moment that the untamed spirit beside him was more than a catalyst. She was a guide. Not a ruler, not a subordinate, but an equal force shaping the possibilities of their shared world. And yet, even as he acknowledged her influence, he grappled with the legacy of his role. For decades, he had ruled under the curse's shadow, making decisions hardened by fear, compliance, and survival. Generations had looked to him for guidance, yet he had been shackled by inherited despair. Now, with freedom, he faced the daunting task of redefining leadership, of ensuring that his power did not replace one tyranny with another. The first test arrived swiftly. A dispute broke out near the northern fields, where villagers argued over water allocation, old habits of scarcity clashing with the new abundance. Alistair stepped forward, calm but authoritative. "Enough," he said, his voice carrying without harshness. "The curse is gone. We are no longer bound by fear or limitation. Speak, but speak with fairness, with respect, and remember that life belongs to all of us." A murmur of understanding rippled through the crowd. Slowly, arguments softened into dialogue, resentment giving way to negotiation. Alistair watched, heart swelling with cautious hope, realizing that leadership in this new era required listening as much as directing, collaboration as much as command. Ailey remained close, observing his approach. "You are learning quickly," she said, her voice teasing yet sincere. "The curse may have taken much from you, but it cannot touch the courage you wield now." He turned to her, green eyes meeting amber. "I do not wield courage alone," he said quietly. "You have taught me what it means to live without chains. That is far stronger than anything I have known." Her smile was fleeting, a spark of warmth in the crisp Highland air. "Then let us teach them together," she said. "Let us remind them that freedom is not just the absence of curses, but the presence of courage, of choice, of spirit." The following weeks were a whirlwind of reconstruction and reconciliation. Villagers, emboldened by their liberation, sought guidance rather than decree. Alistair walked among them constantly, his presence no longer a symbol of fear but of possibility. Together with Ailey, he guided decisions on agriculture, trade, and community rituals, blending ancient traditions with newfound creativity. Alistair also faced the personal reckoning he had long deferred. Memories of harsh judgments, of failures under the curse's weight, surfaced like jagged stones. He confronted the guilt and regret he had carried, acknowledging the pain inflicted, not maliciously, but as a consequence of living under relentless despair. And slowly, he forgave himself, understanding that the measure of leadership now lay not in perfection, but in courage, humility, and willingness to change. One evening, he and Ailey climbed the cliffs once more, the village below bathed in twilight gold. They watched as families gathered in the square, children running barefoot, elders laughing with tears in their eyes. The land itself seemed to hum with satisfaction, rivers shimmering like molten silver, hillsides vibrant with color, and the wind carrying a melody of life reborn. "You've changed everything," Alistair said, voice low. "I see it now, the way the village breathes, the way the people smile, the way the land thrives. And yet I feel responsibility. The curse is gone, but I must ensure it never returns." Ailey placed a hand over his, her grip firm, grounding him. "Responsibility is a part of life, Alistair. But so is trust, in yourself, in your people, and in the spirit that drives them. You do not have to bear it alone. And remember, the future is unwritten. You shape it every day, with every choice, with every heartbeat." Alistair exhaled, a sound of release mingled with wonder. He had carried the weight of despair, and now he carried the weight of hope. It was heavier in a different way, but infinitely more fulfilling. His eyes scanned the horizon, where forests stretched endlessly, rivers glimmered, and the highlands rose proud and unconquered. Dunraith was alive. Its people were alive. And he, reborn, untethered, and infinitely more aware, was alive as well. The night descended, stars puncturing the deep velvet sky, and the Alpha stood beside the untamed spirit who had shattered the chains of centuries. The reckoning was complete, yet the journey had only begun. Together they would guide their world into an era defined not by fear, but by courage, creativity, and choice. And as the wind carried the faint scent of peat and wildflowers across the highlands, Alistair MacRuaird understood the truth that had eluded him for generations. Power without freedom is hollow, leadership without courage is meaningless, and life, truly lived, requires a spirit unbound. Ailey's eyes met his one last time for the evening, amber flames reflecting the starlight. "We have undone much," she said softly. "But the true test lies ahead, how we shape what comes next, and whether the people of Dunraith can hold on to the freedom we have given them." Alistair nodded, feeling the weight and the promise of it. "Then we shall guide them," he said. "Together. And nothing, not fear, not tradition, not shadows, will hold us back again." The highlands whispered around them, a chorus of rebirth, and for the first time in centuries, Alistair MacRuaird felt whole, alive, and free. The Alpha had been reborn, not merely as a ruler, but as a guardian, a guide, and a man unbound by curses or chains. The dawn of Dunraith's new era had arrived. The village of Dunraith hummed with activity, vibrant and alive in ways the Highlands had not witnessed for generations. The curse had been broken, yet the remnants of its shadow lingered in the hearts and minds of the people. Old habits, fears, and rigid traditions did not vanish overnight. Freedom, they discovered, was exhilarating, terrifying, and complicated. Alistair MacRuaird walked through the central square, observing the subtle chaos of reconstruction. Villagers debated, planned, argued, and collaborated with a fervor born of liberation. Some ideas clashed violently with long-held customs. Others merged seamlessly into the new order. Each interaction carried the tremor of change, a reminder that the breaking of chains was only the first step. Now came the true test: how to build a society unbound by the shadows of the past. Ailey Macbeth moved beside him, her presence steady and reassuring. Her untamed spirit, which had shattered centuries of despair, now served as a guiding force in the delicate task of social renewal. She spoke to the villagers as equals, encouraging dialogue, creativity, and courage. And yet, she knew the path would not be smooth. Freedom was intoxicating, but it demanded discipline, compassion, and wisdom to sustain. "Some of them resist change," Ailey said softly, gesturing toward a group of elders who sat apart, their faces lined with skepticism. "They have lived under the curse longer than most. Tradition is all they know. And now, everything we are building feels uncertain, even threatening." Alistair nodded. "And yet they must adapt. They will because they must. The alternative is stagnation. They approached the elders, whose eyes followed the alpha and the untamed spirit with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. One, a woman named Catriona McAllister, spoke first. Her voice was brittle, shaped by decades of fear and compliance. "We have lived under the curse for so long, Alistair. I fear that the freedom we have been given is too much for us. Too much responsibility." Ailey knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "Responsibility is freedom's twin, Catriona. Without it, power and choice are meaningless. But you are not alone. We will guide you. We will listen. And together we will find balance." The elder hesitated, and then something in her expression softened, an ember of hope igniting. Around them, other villagers began to murmur, cautiously opening to the idea that the world had changed and that perhaps they, too, could change with it. Alistair stepped forward, placing a hand on the edge of the fountain. "We are entering a new era," he said, voice resonant, carrying authority tempered with empathy. "We cannot cling to old fears. We cannot dictate life through obedience alone. We must create a society of trust, collaboration, and courage. Voice matters. Choice matters. And together, we will shape Dunraith into a home worthy of life unbound." The villagers listened, and slowly, the skepticism began to fracture. Discussions turned into workshops, disputes evolved into councils, and old rituals were reimagined into celebrations of renewal rather than ceremonies of obedience. Children and adults alike contributed ideas, their voices interweaving to form a tapestry of collective ambition. But not all embraced the change so readily. Some clung to shadows, fearful of freedom's unpredictable currents. Alistair noticed them, the ones who lingered on the periphery, eyes wary, movements cautious. They whispered of curses returning, of chaos overwhelming order, and of the dangers of letting the untamed spirit influence the alpha. Ailey caught his eye. "They fear freedom because they have never known it," she said. "And fear can be more stubborn than any curse. We must meet it not with force, but with patience, understanding, and unwavering courage." Over the next weeks, Alistair and Ailey implemented structures to guide the village's evolution. Councils were formed where every villager, young or old, could voice ideas and participate in decisions. Traditions were re-examined. Festivals once steeped in fear became celebrations of renewal. Storytelling turned from cautionary tales into narratives of courage, and education emphasized creativity and exploration over rote obedience. The process was exhilarating and exhausting. Arguments flared as old customs clashed with new ideas. A debate over water rights in the northern fields escalated into a heated confrontation before villagers remembered the lessons Ailey had instilled: listen, adapt, and seek balance. Alistair mediated with patience, guiding the discussion toward compromise, demonstrating leadership not through command, but through vision and empathy. At night, when the village quieted, Alistair reflected on the shifts he had witnessed. The people were learning to live without fear, to navigate freedom without chaos. Yet he understood that the balance they sought was delicate. A single misstep, a lapse in guidance, could allow doubt or resentment to take root again. The Alpha's rebirth was not merely physical. It demanded constant vigilance, emotional resilience, and trust in the untamed spirit beside him. Ailey, sensing his thoughts, reached out, brushing a strand of wind-tossed hair from his face. "You cannot control everything," she said softly. "The people must learn to take responsibility for themselves. Our role is guidance, not domination. Freedom is not about obedience. It is about courage, and courage grows with choice." Alistair nodded, though his green eyes betrayed the weight he carried. He had spent decades leading under the certainty of fear. Now he led under the uncertainty of trust. The lessons were harsh, yet liberating. And he realized that the Alpha's role was not to impose, but to nurture the potential in each person, to foster a society that could thrive independently of his will. As days turned into weeks, the villagers of Dunraith adapted. Fields flourished, once dormant wells brimmed with water, and the forests pulsed with renewed vitality. Children played openly, women and men worked together in harmony, and the highlands rang with song and laughter once more. Even the elders, initially hesitant, found themselves participating, guiding with wisdom but learning to let go of fear. Alistair and Ailey's partnership deepened. The Alpha had been reborn in strength and clarity, yet he recognized that his growth was inseparable from hers. Together they exemplified balance, strength tempered with insight, courage guided by compassion, authority softened by humility. And together, they inspired the villagers to embrace the possibilities of life unshackled. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in gold and crimson, Alistair stood on the cliffs, gazing at the village below. Ailey joined him, silent, letting the wind carry her presence to him. The square was alive with celebration, music drifting upward, villagers dancing and singing, their joy unrestrained. This is only the beginning," he said quietly, voice tinged with awe. "Freedom is not a single moment. It is a constant challenge. Every choice, every action shapes what comes next. And yet I feel hope. Real hope. For the first time in centuries." Ailey smiled, her wild spirit undimmed by the responsibilities they now shared. "Hope is what we must protect," she said. "It is fragile, yes, but resilient when nurtured. The village, the land, the people. All of them will grow stronger because of what we've begun. And you, Alistair, will guide them, not as a ruler imposed by fear, but as a leader chosen through courage, wisdom, and trust." He exhaled, feeling the weight of those words settle into a determination deeper than anything he had known. The curse had ended, but society's transformation required vigilance, patience, and unity. And for the first time he understood the true meaning of leadership, to cultivate not obedience, but the strength, courage, and agency of every individual. Below, the villagers' songs rose to meet them, a chorus of life reborn. Alistair felt the pulse of Dunraith in every stone, every tree, every heartbeat. It was no longer a village bound by shadows, but a community alive with possibility, resilience, and the promise of what lay ahead. Ailey touched his arm, amber eyes reflecting the fading light. "We have done much," she said. "But the work continues. Change is never complete, but it is beautiful, and it is ours to guide." Alistair nodded, understanding fully now the balance they would need to maintain. Freedom was exhilarating but fragile. Leadership was empowering but demanding. And yet, side by side with the untamed spirit who had shattered centuries of despair, he felt ready to face doubt, resistance, and the unpredictable currents of life unbound. The night deepened, stars glinting like diamonds over the highlands. Dunraith was awake. Its people were learning, growing, and discovering themselves in ways unimagined. And Alistair Macruarid, reborn and unshackled, stood beside Ailey, the untamed heart who had changed everything, ready to guide the village through the flux and toward a future they would shape together. The world had shifted, the chains had broken, and society was alive with the exhilarating, terrifying, wondrous promise of freedom. The highlands of Dunraith were alive with a rhythm that had not been heard for centuries. Rivers ran clear, forests rustled with renewed life, and the villages thrummed with energy born from freedom. The curse had been shattered, and society was no longer bound by fear, but the work of creation was only beginning. Alistair Macruarid, reborn and strengthened, understood that forging a new world would demand not just courage, but vision, patience, and unwavering commitment. Ailey Macbeth moved through the village square with her usual untamed grace, observing the activity with a keen eye. Children ran freely, women and men rebuilt homes, and artisans experimented with new designs, their hands shaping a future unburdened by the weight of tradition. The untamed spirit had done more than break the curse. She had ignited imagination, inspiration, and ambition. Alastair approached her, cloak billowing in the Highland wind. "The people are eager," he said, voice low but steady. "But enthusiasm without guidance can lead to chaos. We must ensure that freedom does not dissolve into disorder." Ailey smiled, amber eyes bright. "True. But freedom also demands trust. They must be allowed to explore, to fail, to grow. We guide, yes, but we do not dictate. The world we forge must be theirs as much as it is ours." Together, they convened the first Great Council of Dunraith, an unprecedented gathering where every villager, regardless of age or status, had a voice. The square filled with anticipation as people took turns presenting ideas for agriculture, trade, education, and governance. Alastair listened intently, absorbing suggestions and facilitating discussions, while Ailey encouraged creativity and challenged old assumptions. One elder, Fergus MacLeod, proposed restructuring the irrigation system to allow for shared water use across the northern and southern fields. "For generations we have fought over water, yet none of it is truly ours," he said. "We must cooperate, or we will squander the gift we have been given." A young woman, Moira Cameron, added, "And the crops themselves could be diverse, not the same patterns repeated for decades. We could experiment, learn from each other, and grow stronger together." Alastair nodded, feeling pride swell in his chest. "This is how we forge a new world," he said aloud. "By listening, adapting, and embracing possibility. We have been given freedom, but it is our responsibility to cultivate it with care and courage." Ailey's hand brushed his arm, a silent affirmation. "And remember, Alastair, the world is alive. It responds to our actions. If we act with respect, with courage, with vision, it will flourish. If we act from fear, from rigidity, it will rebel. The land is as alive as the people. It reflects our intent." The days that followed were a whirlwind of collaboration. Villagers experimented with new farming techniques, rebuilt homes with innovative designs, and revived forgotten arts. The Alpha and the Untamed spirit worked tirelessly, not from a desire to control, but from a commitment to inspire and nurture. Alastair encountered moments of doubt. The remnants of the curse lingered in subtle ways. Fear of failure, hesitation in decision-making, and whispered skepticism among some villagers. He confronted each challenge with patience, remembering the lessons Ailey had imparted. Leadership was not coercion, but guidance. Power was not domination, but facilitation. Courage was not absence of fear, but action in spite of it. One evening, while walking along the cliffs overlooking the village, Alastair and Ailey paused to watch the sunset paint the highlands in gold and crimson. The village below buzzed with activity. Children laughing, artisans hammering and carving, elders mentoring the next generation. "The world we build will not be perfect," Alastair said quietly, voice tinged with reflection. "But it will be ours. Ours to shape, to protect, to nurture. And perhaps that is enough." Ailey turned to him, her gaze steady, unwavering. "It is more than enough," she said. "It is the beginning of something enduring. Every choice we make, every act of courage, every encouragement we give to the people, these are the threads from which a new world is woven." Alastair's green eyes met her amber gaze, and for a moment, the weight of centuries lifted. He saw not only what they had achieved but also what lay ahead. A society thriving on creativity, collaboration, and courage, a land pulsing with life, a people capable of both independence and unity. The Alpha realized that his rebirth was intertwined with this society's transformation. Leadership was no longer about command, it was about nurturing potential and inspiring growth. In the square, villagers began gathering for the first festival since the curse's breaking. Music and laughter filled the air, a celebration of life unbound. Moira Cameron played a tune on a newly crafted lute, while children danced in the streets, their shadows stretching long under the evening sun. Even the elders joined, their movements cautious at first, then growing with confidence and joy. Alistair stood beside Ailey, watching the interplay of light, sound, and energy. "It is remarkable," he whispered. "They have taken freedom and made it beautiful." Ailey smiled, her untamed spirit glowing in the twilight. "And it is only the beginning. The festival, the crops, the councils, these are the first steps. The true forging of a new world will take years, but the foundation is strong. Life has returned not because of power or decree, but because of courage, collaboration, and hope." As night fell, stars blanketed the highlands, and the village of Dunraith glimmered with lanterns and laughter. The Alpha and the Untamed spirit moved through the square, offering guidance, encouragement, and reassurance. Each interaction, each shared idea, each act of collaboration strengthened the bonds between the people, the land, and their leaders. In the quiet moments between festivities, Alistair reflected on the journey. The curse had shaped him, tested him, and taught him endurance, but freedom had reshaped him, awakened him, and demanded courage he had not known he possessed. Ailey had been the catalyst, the untamed spark that shattered chains, but the forging of a new world required more than defiance. It required vigilance, patience, and unwavering commitment to nurture life and choice. Ailey approached him, her gaze sweeping over the thriving village. "You see it, don't you?" she asked softly. "The change is tangible. The land, the people, even you. Everything responds to intent, to courage, to vision." Alistair nodded, a smile curving his lips. "Yes, and I understand now that leadership is not about shaping people to obey, but about shaping a world in which they can thrive. We have broken the curse, Ailey, but our work is to build a life worth living. Together we will guide this village, this land, and these people into a future unshackled by fear." The Untamed spirit's eyes sparkled in the lantern light, and for a moment, the Alpha saw not only the village thriving but the possibilities that stretched beyond the highlands. A world where courage, choice, and collaboration defined life. A society no longer confined by shadows. A land alive and responsive to human spirit. And in that moment, Alistair MacRuaird knew the truth. The forging of a new world required not magic, not power, not fear. It required courage, unity, and the unrelenting force of life itself. The festival continued deep into the night, a celebration of freedom, of life, and of the possibilities that lay ahead. Villagers laughed, danced, and sang, their voices carrying across the highlands like a promise. Alistair and Ailey moved among them, guiding, nurturing, inspiring, yet allowing the people to take ownership of their world. The highlands of Dunraith were no longer a land of despair, submission, and shadow. They had become a land of possibility, resilience, and life. And at the heart of it all stood the reborn Alpha and the Untamed spirit, partners in creation, guardians of hope, and the living embodiment of courage unbound. The new world had begun, forged not by decree, but by defiance, spirit, and the shared vision of a people awakened. And as the lanterns flickered against the night sky, Alistair and Ailey knew that together, they would continue to shape Dunraith. Not through chains, but through life, courage, and the unbreakable bond of freedom. The sun rose over Dunraith with a brilliance that seemed almost celebratory, illuminating the highlands in gold and amber. Birds sang with a freedom that had long been forbidden, and the rivers sparkled with clarity, reflecting the sky and the renewed land below. Dunraith was alive, not just in the sense of survival, but in the deep, unrestrained vitality of life unbound. And yet, Alistair MacRuaird and Ailey Macbeath understood that the true measure of their triumph would not be immediate, but enduring. The breaking of the curse had done more than restore the village. It had begun a ripple that extended far beyond Dunraith's highland borders. Neighboring clans, long resigned to their own shadowed fates, began to hear of the transformation. Traders traveling through the valleys whispered tales of freedom, of crops thriving without oversight, of villages guided not by fear, but by courage, creativity, and choice. Slowly, cautiously, the news reached ears that had not believed in hope for generations. Alastair stood on the cliff above the northern ridge, watching the village bustle below. His eyes traced the movement of villagers in harmony, elders teaching, children learning, and artisans crafting. He felt a deep, resonant pride, tempered by the awareness that the world beyond Dunraith remained untouched by the transformation. There were skeptics, resistors, and those who still bowed to the shadows of curses and fear. The ripple was spreading, yes, but it was fragile. Ailey approached, her steps light on the grass, her presence as untamed and vital as ever. "They will come," she said softly. "Others will see the change here and question their own acceptance of despair. Your courage, Alastair, and the courage of this village, it will inspire. It already has." Alastair nodded, though doubt lingered like the morning mist. "And yet there will be resistance," he murmured. "Change is never welcomed by all, and the ripple can be stopped if fear outweighs hope." "Then we strengthen hope," Ailey said simply. "We nurture it, demonstrate it, and allow it to spread through example. Courage is contagious, as is despair. Which will we allow to dominate?" The ripple became evident sooner than expected. Messengers from neighboring clans arrived, curious, skeptical, and sometimes openly hostile. They came to observe, to question, to challenge. Alastair and Ailey met each visitor with patience and transparency, showing the results of life unshackled. Fields flourished without coercion, disputes were resolved through discussion rather than force, and joy rang freely in the village square. One clan elder, Callum MacFarlane, voiced the hesitation of many. "We have heard tales," he said, brow furrowed. "But how can freedom thrive where there is no fear? How can authority exist without control?" Alastair's voice carried over the gathered crowd, calm but resonant. "Authority exists not in fear, but in responsibility. Leadership is earned through courage, wisdom, and the care of those you guide. Control is temporary. Trust, once cultivated, endures. Fear cannot shape a lasting world, but courage and collaboration can." Ailey stepped forward, eyes blazing with the quiet fire that had shattered the ancient curse. "Look at Dunraith," she said, sweeping her gaze across the vibrant village below. "We are living proof that freedom does not descend into chaos. It elevates, empowers, and awakens life that has long been dormant. You can cling to fear, or you can step into possibility." The elders observed, silent at first, then slowly nodding. The ripple was spreading. Skepticism softened into curiosity, curiosity into tentative action, and action into the first steps toward transformation. The villages beyond Dunraith began experimenting with new ways of living. Councils, shared responsibilities, education, and festivals of creation rather than obedience. Meanwhile, within Dunraith, the villagers themselves were evolving. The children of the curse's shadow grew up without fear, learning to explore their world, to question, and to create. Women and men worked alongside one another with mutual respect and collaboration. Even the elders, once cautious and wary, found themselves embracing innovation and mentoring the next generation. Every choice, every act of courage, every contribution of creativity became a thread in the tapestry of the new world. Alastair walked through the village one evening, observing the growth. He passed the fields, now flourishing with diverse crops, children laughing as they chased chickens, and artisans crafting with pride. He stopped at the fountain where elders shared stories and ideas, not commands. Life here was vibrant, chaotic, and alive, not as a result of magic, but as a reflection of courage and choice. Ailey joined him, leaning against the fountain. "Do you see it?" she asked, voice soft but compelling. "The ripple. It is moving outward. Dunraith is no longer an isolated miracle. Others will follow, and they will change their worlds as we have changed ours. Alistair's green eyes met her amber gaze, a mixture of awe and determination in their depths. And yet, the responsibility weighs heavily. The ripple can falter, hope can be lost, and freedom can be squandered. We must remain vigilant, guiding and inspiring as we have done. Then we do, Ailey said firmly. Together. Not to control but to nurture. To teach courage, choice, and resilience. The ripple is only as strong as the actions we take, the examples we set, and the hearts we inspire. The nights in Dunraith became a time of reflection, storytelling, and planning. Alistair and Ailey worked with the villagers to establish structures that balanced freedom with responsibility. Councils, mentorship, community projects, and collaborative decision-making. Every initiative was designed not to impose, but to inspire, creating a society capable of sustaining the ripple far beyond the Highlands. As the weeks passed, messengers returned from distant clans, reporting on the subtle but undeniable transformations taking place. Villages previously resigned to despair were now experimenting with shared governance, education, and communal festivals. Markets thrived with creative trade, and disputes were approached with negotiation rather than force. The ripple had reached beyond Dunraith, a wave of courage and possibility beginning to reshape the broader world. Alistair stood once more on the northern cliffs, watching the highlands stretch into the horizon. The wind carried the sounds of life, laughter, and song from villages near and far. The ripple was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, growing, unstoppable in its momentum. Ailey joined him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "We have changed much," she said quietly, "but the ripple is only beginning. Your courage, your leadership, our people's choices, these are the forces that will sustain it. The world beyond Dunraith will awaken because we dared to act, because we refused to accept despair, because we embraced life." Alistair exhaled, feeling both the weight and the exhilaration of responsibility. He had inherited a curse that had shaped generations, yet he now carried a legacy of freedom, possibility, and courage. The ripple would test them, challenge them, and demand vigilance, but it would also inspire, empower, and awaken the hearts of countless others. Below, the village of Dunraith celebrated, unaware of the full magnitude of their influence. Alistair and Ailey watched, understanding that the transformation of one community had begun a movement that could reshape the land itself. The ripple of life, courage, and freedom was unstoppable, a force born from defiance, love, and unrelenting spirit. The night deepened, stars glittering across the highlands like scattered gems. Alistair turned to Ailey, voice steady. "We have done more than break a curse. We have begun a movement, a transformation that will echo for generations. The ripple cannot be contained, and it should not be. We will guide it, nurture it, and allow it to grow beyond what we can even imagine." Ailey smiled, amber eyes shining in the moonlight. "And so it begins. Life unbound, courage unbroken, and the promise of a world forever changed. The ripple is ours to sustain, and ours to witness." The highlands whispered around them, carrying the stories of Dunraith outward, beyond mountains, rivers, and forests. And in that whisper, the world began to awaken. Alistair Macruarid, reborn Alpha, and Ailey Macbeath, untamed spirit, stood together as the living testament to possibility. Their courage, vision, and unwavering defiance had not only shattered centuries of despair but had set in motion a wave of transformation that would ripple far beyond their own lives, their own village, and even their own highlands. The ripple was unstoppable, and the world, for the first time in centuries, was beginning to awaken to life unshackled. The dawn over Dunraith rose slow and golden, spilling light across highland peaks and valleys, bathing the village in warmth that felt almost sacred. The wind carried scents of peat, wildflowers, and damp earth, intertwining with the laughter and voices of villagers thriving in a freedom that had once been unimaginable. Life here was vibrant, unshackled, and yet, as Alastair MacRuarid walked the streets, he understood that the true gift of the curse's breaking was not merely liberation. It was the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. Ailey Macbeth moved beside him, her bare feet whispering against the stone paths. Her amber eyes gleamed with curiosity and fire, ever untamed, reflecting the Highlands' light and the potential of the future. "Do you see it?" she asked softly, voice carrying over the morning bustle. "The change is not just here. It's in the way they think, the way they speak, the way they dream." Alastair nodded, green eyes scanning the village. Children raced past, skipping stones across the fountain's surface. Women negotiated trade and artisans displayed wares with pride. Elders discussed community plans alongside the young. All of it flowed seamlessly, guided not by fear or obligation, but by trust, courage, and choice. It was mesmerizing and fragile. "They are learning," he said quietly, "that life does not have to be dictated by shadows or curses. That choice, even when daunting, can be more powerful than any decree." Ailey's hand brushed his arm, grounding him in the moment. "And they will continue to learn because we will continue to guide. Not as rulers imposed by fear, but as partners in life, in courage, in possibility. Dunraith is alive, Alastair, because we refuse to accept the limitations others handed down to us. And that is only the beginning." The village square stirred as preparations began for a festival unlike any seen before. It was not a festival of obedience, nor a ceremony born of superstition. It was a celebration of choice, freedom, and life itself. Villagers had crafted decorations, rehearsed songs, and arranged communal feasts. Laughter rang out as children rehearsed dances and elders offered wisdom in the shaping of new games and traditions. Alastair surveyed the scene with quiet awe. Every act, every decision, every smile was a testament to what the untamed spirit had ignited. Ailey had been the catalyst, yes, but the people themselves had embraced courage and vision. They were not merely freed, they were awakening, and in that awakening lay the true power of transformation. He remembered the first days after the curse's breaking. Fear, skepticism, and hesitation. He recalled the elders' doubts, the villagers' cautious movements, and the ghosts of despair that lingered in every corner. And now, looking at the living, breathing world before him, he understood the truth that had eluded his ancestors. The real curse had never been ancient magic, but the acceptance of a predetermined fate, the quiet surrender to despair. Ailey nudged him gently, sensing his reflection. "You've carried this burden longer than most," she said. "Generations of despair shaped you, yet you have chosen not only to survive, but to reshape everything. That is courage, true, unrelenting courage." Alastair exhaled, a slow, deep release that carried away decades of weight. "And yet," he murmured, "there is more to do. The ripple we began extends beyond Dunraith. Others will see, others will resist, and some will falter. The freedom we have built is beautiful but fragile. Every choice we make now shapes not only this village, but the land, the people, and the generations to come. Then we shape it wisely," Ailey replied, her voice firm yet warm. "With courage, with patience, with integrity. The ripple is unstoppable, yes, but its impact depends on how we act, how we inspire, and how we nurture the hearts of those who follow." The festival began in earnest as the sun climbed higher, illuminating every smile. Every hand joined in collaboration, every song and dance. Villagers shared stories of the curse's end, tales of courage and defiance, and the legend of the untamed spirit who had shattered chains and inspired life anew. Even distant travelers and messengers, who had heard whispers of Dunraith's transformation, joined in, witnessing the awakening of a world that had been locked in shadow for centuries. Alastair moved through the crowd, offering guidance, encouragement, and reassurance. He spoke with young leaders eager to take initiative, advised artisans and farmers experimenting with innovation, and listened with patience to elders navigating the balance between tradition and freedom. Ailey followed, her presence a constant reminder of untamed courage, of the possibilities that lay in defiance, in choice, and in life unbound. In the quiet moments between festivities, Alastair reflected on the journey, the curse, the despair, the rebirth, and the ripple that now extended far beyond Dunraith. He thought of every lesson learned, that leadership is not domination but guidance, that freedom demands courage and responsibility, that true change emerges not from fear but from choice, and that the most powerful transformations are those that awaken life, creativity, and hope in others. Ailey joined him at the edge of the cliffs overlooking the village, the wind tossing her hair around her face. "Do you feel it?" she asked, voice soft yet compelling. "The potential, the life, the endless possibilities." Alastair's eyes swept over the highlands, the village, the forests, and the rivers. "I feel it," he said, green eyes glowing with determination. "And I understand now that the future is unwritten. It has never been set, and it never will be. The curse may be gone, but the true test is sustaining this freedom, guiding this awakening, and allowing life to flourish beyond what we can even imagine." Ailey smiled, amber eyes reflecting the sunlight. "Then we continue. Not as rulers, not as masters, but as guardians, guides, and partners in life. Every choice we make, every action we take will shape the path ahead. And the people, they will follow because they choose to, not because they are compelled to. That is the gift we have given them, and the gift they will carry forward." Alastair took her hand, feeling the pulse of life, courage, and possibility that radiated from her. "Together," he said, "we will watch this world grow, and we will guide it when needed. But we will never constrain it again. The highlands, the village, the people, they are alive. And we are alive with them." The festival reached its crescendo as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the highlands. Songs, laughter, and dancing filled the air, weaving a tapestry of celebration, courage, and community. Alastair and Ailey stood at the cliff's edge, looking out over the thriving village and the boundless land beyond, feeling the weight of history and the promise of the future in equal measure. "This is what we have built," Alastair said quietly, voice carrying over the wind. "Not merely freedom, not merely life, but possibility. The true curse was never magic. It was acceptance of limitation. We have undone it, and in doing so, we have created a world where life can flourish unbound." Ailey's eyes softened, her wild spirit tempered by the gravity of the moment. "And the story does not end here. The ripple continues, spreading through choices, through courage, through hope. The future is unwritten, Alastair. And that is the greatest gift of all." He looked at her, seeing not only the untamed spirit who had shattered centuries of despair, but a partner in vision, courage, and transformation. "Then we write it together," he said. "Every day, every choice, every heartbeat. We will nurture life, inspire courage, and guide possibility. And the world will awaken, one heart at a time." As night fell over the highlands, the stars appeared in silent majesty, reflecting the infinite potential of a world reborn. Dunraith glowed with lantern light, music, and laughter, a beacon of life unbound. Alastair and Ailey stood together, hearts beating with hope, courage, and determination, knowing that the legacy of the curse had been undone, and that the future was theirs to shape. The highlands whispered around them, carrying the echoes of freedom, defiance, and the untamed spirit's unyielding force. And for the first time in generations, Alastair MacRuarid understood the profound truth. Life, courage, and choice were gifts far greater than power, control, or fear. The past had been shattered, and the future was unwritten. And in that unwritten future, anything was possible.